There are moments in life that don't just break your heart, they reveal it. They pull back every curtain, strip away every illusion, and show you exactly who the people around you truly are. This is one of those moments. My name is Clara, and for 11 years, I believed I had built something real. A home, a marriage, a life held together by trust, sacrifice, and love. I was the kind of woman who woke up early to make sure everyone was taken care of. I cooked, I cleaned, I worked. I showed up every single day for my husband Daniel, for our home, and for his family too, without ever being asked twice. But there was one person in my life who meant more to me than anyone else in this world. My mother-in-law, Eleanor. She was 82 years old, soft-spoken, gentle, the kind of woman who still kept fresh flowers on her windowsill and hummed old songs while she made tea. She had welcomed me into her family with open arms from the very first day Daniel brought me home. She never made me feel like an outsider. She made me feel like a daughter. And I loved her like one. Daniel worked long hours. He traveled often for business. So without being asked, I became the one who checked on Eleanor. I drove her to her doctor's appointments. I sat with her on slow Sunday afternoons. I picked up her medication when the weather was too cold for her to go out herself. It was never a burden. It was never a duty. It was love. But then, Daniel remarried. Her name was Vanessa. She walked into our lives like she owned them, polished, confident, the kind of woman who smiled at you while calculating her next move. Daniel and I had separated 2 years prior, quietly, painfully, the way most long marriages end. There was no explosion, just a slow fading. And somewhere in that silence, he found her. I had accepted that. I had grieved, healed, and moved forward. What I had not accepted, what I could not accept, was what Vanessa decided to do to Eleanor. It started with small things. Eleanor mentioned, almost in passing, that Vanessa rarely spoke to her, that when she called the house, Vanessa would answer and say Daniel was busy, and hang up before Eleanor could even finish her sentence. I told myself it was an adjustment period. New relationships take time. Not everyone expresses warmth the same way. But then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon. Eleanor called me, and her voice was different, thin, tired, afraid. She told me she had run out of her blood pressure medication. She had called the house. Vanessa had answered. I asked her if she could please pick it up for me on her way home. I wasn't feeling well, Clara. I just needed a little help. I gripped the phone tighter. What did she say, Eleanor? There was a long pause. She said, "I'm not your nurse. Figure it out yourself." And then she hung up. The room went quiet around me. Figure it out yourself. To an 82-year-old woman, alone, unwell, who had done nothing to deserve a single moment of cruelty in her entire gentle life. I felt something shift inside me, not just anger, something deeper, a cold, quiet clarity. I drove to Eleanor's house that same evening. I brought her medication. I brought her dinner. I sat with her until the color came back to her face and she stopped trembling. But even as she smiled and held my hand and told me not to make a fuss, I couldn't let it go. Because Eleanor wouldn't fight for herself. She was too kind for that, too humble. So I made a quiet decision. I would. Daniel needed to know, not out of spite toward Vanessa, but because a man who truly loved his mother would want to know how she was being treated inside his own home. I documented everything, Eleanor's words, the date, the medication, the phone call. I wrote it all down carefully and calmly. Then I reached out to Daniel's sister, Margaret. Margaret lived 3 hours away and didn't always know the day-to-day details of Eleanor's life, but she was fiercely protective of her mother. When I told her what happened, the silence on her end of the phone was deafening. She said, "What?"
Margaret didn't wait. She drove down that same weekend. She sat with Eleanor. She heard it directly from her mother's own lips, quietly, reluctantly, because Eleanor still didn't want to cause trouble. But the truth has a way of refusing to stay quiet. Margaret confronted Daniel, not with screaming, not with accusations, but with facts, with love for their mother, with a kind of calm anger that lands far harder than any raised voice. And Daniel crumbled. Because deep down, I think he already knew something was wrong. He had chosen to look away. to believe the version of events that was easier to live with. But he couldn't look away anymore. Within 2 weeks, arrangements were made for Eleanor to move into a beautiful assisted living home nearby, one she had actually mentioned wanting to try before any of this happened. She had her own garden space, weekly music nights, people her own age to share tea with. She called me when she settled in. "Clara," she said softly, "I have flowers on my windowsill again." I had to pull over my car because I couldn't see the road through my tears. As for Vanessa, I won't pretend justice came in some dramatic, satisfying wave, but the home she thought she had claimed, the family she thought she had won, it was already fracturing at its foundation, because a house built on cruelty never stands. And me? I learned something I will carry for the rest of my life. Kindness is not weakness. Showing up for an 82-year-old woman with fresh medication and a warm meal, that was never small, that was never invisible, even when no one was watching, even when I received nothing in return. The people who mistake gentleness for weakness always, always underestimate what it means to truly love someone. Eleanor still calls me every Sunday. We still talk about flowers, old songs, and the way the light looks in the late afternoon. And I still show up, because that's what love does. It doesn't abandon people when they're inconvenient. It figures it out. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, real strength is knowing who deserves your kindness and never letting cruelty go unanswered.